because Joan has disabled my camera. Shows you who's in control here. Anyhow, it's spring, flowers are blooming, and of course, weeds are growing. So today we have Scott Oneto, who is a farm advisor in El Dorado, Calaveras, Amador, and Tuolumne counties. Has been doing it for 30 plus years. Oh, 27 years, he said. Certainly has a lot of experience. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the weeds he deals with up there are the same as the weeds we probably have down here. So that's his specialty, and I think we're really lucky to have him here. So, all right, Scott, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Joan. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to spend the afternoon with you all virtually. So thank you for the invite. Yeah, as Mike said, my name is Scott Oneto, and yeah, I've been with Extension for about 27 years now, and started off my career actually before even working for Cooperative Extension as a Master Gardener volunteer myself. I took the training back in 98 and just love the program. I mean, ever since I became Master Gardener, I've just been very passionate about what we all do in terms of sharing information, especially research-based information with the public. And so I just like to start off by thanking you all for your commitment to the university and your local communities for doing that. As Mike said, I'm a weed scientist. I work with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I'm a county agent, but mostly focus on a lot of weed control. And so I thought it'd be hopefully fun today to just share some of the research that we all do as academics, as advisors with the University of California. It kind of runs the gamut, and I'm not even going to be able to, unfortunately, have the time to share all of the different stuff that my colleagues are doing across the state with different weed control projects. But you could only imagine with how technology has changed in the last 5, 10, 20 years, how that really has driven a lot of our research. And so everything from, using lasers as weed control tools to using a lot of artificial intelligence to using drones for not only mapping and identifying weeds, but also for spraying weeds. It really does kind of cover all spectrums. And so I thought I would just share some of the research control or research projects that I'm working on here in my area, because I think there is some overlap. And a lot of, like Mike said, a lot of the plants that we have, you all have, California is very, very diverse, but also at the same time, there's a lot of similarities and overlap. So without further ado, I'll get started. And I think we'll have plenty of times for questions, for sidebar conversations, and go on tangents. And so if you have anything as we go along, please don't hesitate to throw stuff in the chat. And I think Joan will read those off, and we'll just kind of address them as they come in. All right, so let me go over here and let's move on. So the first one I wanted to touch on, assuming a lot of you probably know this plant. I think some of the biggest specimens that I've ever seen probably grow from your counties, both in the Solano, Yolo County region. I mean, you can really grow some amazing yellow star thistle. Some of the largest plants, like I said, I've seen plants down there that have, probably been 4, 5, even 6 feet tall. But this is certainly a problem for us here in the foothills as well. This is a picture of a yellow star thistle infestation in Calaveras County. And, I would like to think that with all of the different research that's been done over the years, we have some really good identified strategies on how to control it, both mechanically, culturally, with animal grazing, with fire, with herbicides. But today I wanted to focus on a new piece of biocontrol that we've been looking at. So as some of you may or may not know, there is several different insects as well as a fungus that has been introduced for the control of yellow star thistle. This is sort of the laundry list of those insects that have been introduced. These are also all non-native insects or pathogens that have been identified from the homeland of where yellow star thistle originated from. So you think around the Mediterranean basin, parts of like Turkey, kind of all in that region of the world. That's where yellow star thistle first um, uh, came from. And so when you go to its homeland, it really isn't, a weed, right? Because there's all these things that have sort of co-evolved that feed on, eat, and help keep that plant in check and all these sort of natural balances. And so when we often get invasive or plants that are introduced and they don't have those natural checks and balances, they can, as we all know, grow and outcompete and become these sort of invasion species that dominate the landscape. And so over the years, there's been insects that include the hairy weevil, the bud weevil, the flower weevil, all these different flies, the gall fly, the false peacock fly, um, and one rust in particular, a Puccinia rust that was also introduced. And so the thought is, adding some arsenal to all the other control strategies to try to keep this plant from further expanding its range in California. I think right now we're estimated to believe that yellow star thistle probably covers 15 million acres, maybe more now, maybe it's closer to 18 million acres, but it's a lot. And so when you have a weed that is of that large in terms of its spread, you really do need to have a well-balanced integrated pest management program that includes all of the different control treatments, but specifically having biocontrol certainly can help with that. So these are all ones that have been here for quite some time. Probably the most recent on this list is probably the peacock fly and the false peacock fly. These were introduced, gosh, probably, I'm going to guess, it's been a while now since I've looked up the date, but it was probably the late 90s, early 2000 when these two flies were introduced. The rust fungus just slightly before that. But many of the weevils have been here probably, gosh, for the better part of the last, 4 decades or more. And although they are widespread, as this map kind of shows, the two most commonly uh, distributed species of these biocontrol agents are these two here, the hairy weevil here on your left, and the false peacock fly on your right. These two probably do the most damage to yellow star thistle. And what they do is they basically attack the developing seed heads. So, late summer, when we all know when we recognize yellow star thistle by those yellow flowers and the spiny heads, these flies and weevils will lay their eggs in that developing seed head, and then the larvae will actually feed on some of those seeds. So basically, they kind of compete, in terms of where they're attacking the plant. They're both laying their eggs in developing seed heads or developing flower heads that are ultimately going to make seed. And then the larvae basically tunnel inside there and eat some of those seeds. And so basically it's about seed reduction, right? So it's reducing the number of seeds that the plant is producing. So it's not killing the plant, it's just reducing the amount of seed. And you can see down here at the bottom, these two insects alone, they estimate that it can reduce seed populations or seed production by as much as 50%, which sounds like a really big number, but when you have a plant, especially those really large plants that might be producing, 20, 30, 40,000 seeds or more per plant, even cutting it down by 50%, you still have a lot of seeds being produced out on the landscape. And so you can see again, they're pretty widely distributed. You can see what the colors indicate, right? So going from black to no percent attack, basically up to red, which means you see a lot of activity, a lot of seed activity on plants. You can see that the hairy weevil seems to do really, really good along the Sierra Nevada foothills, especially into your areas in the Central Valley, and then especially in Northern California. A lot of overlap with the false peacock fly, but does really, really, really good in sort of the Central Valley, both north and to the south in the Central Valley and also all along the coast. And so, again, these insects have been, working for quite some time. They're doing good, but we still don't see any major reductions in yellow star thistle population. So, of course, there's been more exploration. There's been continued exploration for trying to identify additional insects, pathogens that could help control yellow star thistle. And hopefully you've heard this great news, but if you haven't, you'll learn it today. But this is a brand new biocontrol agent that was identified in that same region. This insect is called the yellow star thistle rosette weevil. And you can see it here on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, it's this little tiny black insect with this long little snout, which most of these weevils have. And it was first collected, gosh, what is that, almost 40 years ago now, in and around Turkey, again, sort of that native range of yellow star thistle. And for the last 20 years or more, it's been in quarantine, basically in a lab in Albany, California, just outside of the Bay Area, where they've been studying this insect, trying to determine if it is selective, meaning it only attacks yellow star thistle. Because that's really what in terms of when you want to release any type of new thing, right, that's not native to an environment, you want to make sure that there's a lot of host specificity. You want to make sure that that insect is only going to attack whatever that target plant is. We don't want it, attacking any of the agricultural commodities that might be closely related to star thistle, like safflower, sunflower seeds, artichokes. The list goes on and on and on. So basically the last several decades it has been under quarantine. And so to give you an update, just right before COVID hit, September of 2019, the USDA sent out an announcement giving approval to release this insect. And so this is Dr. Lincoln Smith here in the forefront of this photo. He has been the lead researcher out of Albany, just a phenomenal entomologist and researcher. He's been studying this insect for the better part of his career, trying to get it approved for release. And so, as you can see here, it was approved in September of 2019. And you all, at least the ones of you that are in Solano County, you got the very first release of all of North America. That's where Lincoln did his first release. And so that was done in 2020. The following year, in April 2021, I helped him collaborate with the Bureau of Land Management, and we did a release in El Dorado County, one of the counties that I work in, on some Bureau of Land Management property just north of Placerville. And since that time, we've been monitoring those sites. I've been helping, of course, with the site here in my region, and several other folks have been monitoring the site in Solano. And since that time, there's been, I think, 3 other releases in California for this insect. What makes this insect so much, I guess, cool, other than the other insects that I talked about, all those other insects that I shared all basically compete for that same real estate on the plant, right? So they're all seed head insects, seed head weevils, seed head flies. So they are all basically competing for that developing seed head. Unlike this insect, as you can tell from its name, the rosette weevil, it's all attacking the basal portion of the plant, the rosette. So it attacks it much earlier in the spring, and basically the larvae from when the eggs are laid into the plant, the larvae then basically tunnel in the stem or at the basal portion of the plant. So I apologize, this image is so small, but hopefully you can see this is the lower stem of a yellow star thistle plant that is bolting or starting to elongate. And what we're looking for is this tunneling action. Basically, it's eating all of that vascular tissue inside the stem. And so what's different about this plant is where all those other insects reduce the number of seeds produced and doesn't kill the plant, these insects actually are killing the plant, or weakening it enough so that it basically succumbs to death or doesn't have enough resources to flower and set seed. So super, super exciting. We have been watching this insect since basically 2020. I don't have tons of data to show you today, only because it's still preliminary, but we are doing several evaluations every year. Some exciting news is we did finally start seeing some insect feeding last year. I don't have the data from this year from them yet to share with you all, but this is some of the feeding damage on some of the leaves, basically these little pinholes or windows in some of the developing smaller leaves. It's kind of some of the foliar damage that we're looking for. And so yeah, it's super exciting. We're hoping to start seeing more and more damage. These insects are very slow to grow in population because they only have one generation per year, so they only reproduce once. And so I think at both sites, the Solano one and the one that we did in El Dorado County, I mean, we literally released like 40 insects. And so it's like, you so carefully set them out on the landscape, and you just kind of wish them the very best and hope that you see them again or their progeny again. And so we're really hoping that what we have been observing is actually their damage, but we haven't actually seen any of the insects physically yet in those locations, but we do believe we're seeing some of their feeding damage. So more to continue, or more on that will continue. Outside of that, it's now that it's been officially released, the Department of Food and Agriculture in Sacramento has a facility in downtown at one of their facilities where they have a couple of greenhouses dedicated to this insect. So they're very quickly trying to rear as many insects as possible so that they can start doing more mass releases. So hopefully more will be coming on that soon, but definitely want you all to know about that. I know you're all probably familiar with our UC IPM pest notes. So I just rewrote the yellow star thistle pest note. It's gone through peer review finally after, the last entire year, but look for the new one. It should be coming out anytime, like in the next probably month or so. I would imagine it'll hit the website, and it'll have some new information on yellow star thistle control. Specifically, it'll have some new information about this particular weevil. All right, let me continue on. Do I have a question I should take now, or should I hop on to a new topic?
There is one question.
Okay.
When a species is introduced to solve a particular problem, what assurance is there that it won't, in fact, result in some unintended harm?
Great question. And I think that's one of the reasons why so much time and money is spent on the front end of really trying to fully understand what that potentially introduced species has the potential to do. And so you can only imagine, 20 years in quarantine, and all of the money that, the millions and millions of dollars that are spent studying these, in this case, insects, to make sure that they don't have any non-target injury or unintended consequences. It's not foolproof, right? But with that said, I think there is a lot of work that goes into trying to fully understand these insects. So yeah, and one of the reasons why it took so long on this one is there was some closely related species that they initially thought that this insect could reproduce on, and so it just took all of that time to really understand whether or not it would, by forcing the insect on those plants and making sure that they couldn't reproduce and complete their life cycle. I guess with that said, I will say that it's not, I said it's not foolproof, and things happen, right? So I'll go back to this list really quickly here. One of these insects never went through the actual process, right? So the peacock fly did. It went through the rigorous testing, but it turned out that after it was officially recognized and approved for release, it turned out that there was also a completely different species that was in the mix, which is this one right underneath it, the false peacock fly. So there's actually two completely different species here of Catarrhalia, that's the genus of this fly, but there's the regular peacock fly, then this false peacock fly. The false peacock fly was, I guess you could say, an unintended introduced species. It was not the one that they were intentionally trying to study. So things do happen. And if we have time, maybe I'll talk about another case, a similar incident that I'm dealing with right now. Again, no unintended consequences, but another different biocontrol agent that we're tracking on Scotch broom that also never was officially released. It just showed up here in California a couple of years ago, and now we're tracking it very closely.
No other questions.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on to a couple of really, really bad grasses that we have here in my region, across all of your region, across much of California. And they really impact a lot of annual rangelands in our blue oak woodlands. And so these two grasses that I'm going to talk a little bit about is one here on the left called barbed goat grass. There's actually three different goat grass species that we have here in California, but this is the worst one. This is Agalops triennialis, or barbed goat grass. Really, really long awns, super, super pokey, have these like little reverse barbs on the awns that can get caught in animals' noses and their mouths. If you've ever hiked through any type of grasslands with this plant, especially during the flowering stage like this whole entire inflorescence, or the top part of the flower here, basically breaks off, and that whole thing, so you're talking about 2 inches, it'll literally like fly up your pants. And it's like super, super uncomfortable. So I don't know how many different colleagues I've had over the years where they've like literally dropped their britches out in the field to get one of these things out of their pants. It's just, they're really, really nasty. So that's one of the ones I want to cover. The other one, Medusa head, this one here on the right, also super long awns and really, really problematic. In terms of these two plants, just a quick overview, again, non-native from the Mediterranean region. They've been here for a long time. Medusa head by itself infests probably about 3 million acres now across the western US, and barbed goat grass is rapidly spreading, especially in our area. Just in the last 10 years, I'm just seeing it grow at a very, very alarming rate. I would kind of classify these as what I call transformer species, meaning they are so competitive that they basically outcompete, even though they're growing in sort of this mixed annual grassland where there should be lots of species diversity. They have a tendency to outcompete everything, and so you get these just monocultures of just nothing but Medusa head, nothing but barbed goat grass. And the reason they're bad, other than having the long awns, it causing all this mechanical injury to animals that are trying to graze on them, they're just really poor forage value. So they often, Medusa head specifically, is very high in silica, so it's often like chewing on glass, and so animals just have a tendency to avoid it. And because they're avoiding it, then we're kind of selecting for it, right? So if we don't eat it, we let it flower, we let it make new seed, we eat everything else. We're just selectively kind of grazing for these nasty weeds. Also, because it is high in silica, it doesn't break down like a lot of our annual grasses do. So you have a tendency to see these very, very thick thatch mats on the landscape. And this is just kind of an example of what that looks like. This is a rangeland a picture that I took a couple of years ago of just Medusa head thatch. So everything you see here is old Medusa head that might be, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, and it just kind of lays over on itself year after year and just keeps on building up this thatch. And the seed is really the biology of the seed is really interesting in how it's able to drill itself down through all that thatch and germinate and grow, the following year. And pretty much nothing else can do that. So it's kind of just self-selecting for itself year after year after year. So definitely a really, really big problem. As with yellow star thistle, we've got these amazing control strategies that we've developed. We know when to burn it. We know when and how to graze it. We know we can use mowing to prevent seed set. We know we can spray it with herbicides, but there's no biocontrol agents currently available here in California. So there's always, opportunities for trying new things, right? Trying to be creative, thinking outside of the box. And so several years ago, there was a researcher that identified a pathogen in the soil. That this is a Pseudomonas. If you're familiar with that sort of genus, it's a very, very large genus of bacteria that live in the soil. And so they're native, right? So they occur in the soil. And they found that certain strains of this Pseudomonas fluorescens could actually control or reduce the growth of certain plants, specifically a couple of grasses, and that those grasses that seem to be sensitive to it were Medusa head, were goat grass, was cheatgrass, these really, really, really bad annual weeds across all of the Midwest. And so this particular strain it's identified as ACK55. It was found in parts of Washington State. And so a company has picked it up. The company is called BioWest. They've actually now manufactured this strain of Pseudomonas into a jug. Actually, probably have. Didn't even think of this before. It's outside it's in the hallway. I actually just had a jug of this on my desk yesterday, but I cleaned up my office and I stuck it out because I have to go put it out in our pesticide storage. But anyways, sorry for that. But anyways, they have a product called Battalion Pro, and Battalion Pro is basically a bio herbicide. So it's just a jug of this bacteria of this ACK55 strain, and it's basically sprayed on the landscape. You're basically trying to build up the population in the soil of this bacterium with the idea that over time the bacterium will build up in large enough populations where it'll start controlling the Medusa head. So anyways, this particular product, Battalion Pro, is registered in every state. I think every single state, nearly every state, except for California. So California, of course, has an entirely sort of separate. It has, the federal registration, but then there's also the state registration that has to occur for products of any pesticide to be applied or sold in California. And so it's never gone through the California registration because there's never been any data to support whether or not it's effective on Medusa head here in California. So make a long story short, we put in a trial this last November. So we are currently studying whether or not this particular Pseudomonas will have any effect on Medusa head. We are also looking at whether or not our because I mentioned everywhere you go, if you take a soil sample, you'll probably identify 1, 2, maybe several different strains of Pseudomonas in soils everywhere. And so we did take some soil samples and identified some native isolates of Pseudomonas. And so we're looking at whether or not those local strains have any effect either. But really where the rubber hits the road is, can a product like this actually have any efficacy? So we're doing some trials right now. We're actually going to be collecting that data next week. And so we'll know whether or not the trials we put out last November show any control or maybe any hopefully hope. We did we did actually collect some Medusa head seeds from this site and did some lab work. So actually put them in Petri dishes to see whether or not there was any reduction in growth. And we did actually see some reduction in growth in the lab. But again, until we actually put it out in the field, that's really, again, where you want to see the effects. So we'll stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll have some data to share here in the next month or so. Any questions on those two before I switch to a completely different topic?
There are no questions.
Okay. Okay. This is an exciting new sort of technology that I've been working on for the last, gosh, I think this will be going into about maybe year 4. But this is called basically virtual fence technology. And I guess the first thing you'd have to ask yourself is, what the heck is virtual fence? And so, for those of you that, maybe tried one of these like, yard fence technologies in the past where, you're maybe trying to keep your dog in the yard and you put this wire out on the landscape and you had a little collar on the dog. And as that dog with the collar came up close to that wire, it would pick up that frequency and potentially, either vibrate or make a noise or maybe shock, all of those kinds of things. Well, this is kind of to the next level, right? So this is kind of that same sort of, I guess, thought process, but rather than having anything really out on the landscape other than the collars, we don't need, to put any wires or anything like that out on the landscape. And so basically this is putting GPS collars on animals, and then we use our computers or our phones, and we basically start drawing these virtual boundaries or these virtual pastures. And we then train the animals to recognize the signals that these collars emit. And the first is they get an audio cue, and then they will ultimately get a electrical stimulus if they don't listen to or respond to that auditory cue. And so I put a little asterisk here because I say without physical fences, I don't think this technology will ever replace perimeter fences, but I'll show you some uses that we've been using this technology for, where I think it can have a lot of real life uses. So just a couple pictures of what the technology, I guess, uses. I mentioned there's really no infrastructure out on the landscape. I guess that's not completely true. So the first thing is, of course, the collars. And so the animals are fitted with these collars, and there's a couple of different companies now in North America. This is just one of them. And so they all range in different sizes and shapes. The last picture I showed, this is one of the first companies that were in North America, and specifically they're manufactured here in California. But then there's this company here. These are out of New Zealand. And the other piece of equipment that is often needed, but I think this will eventually be going away, is this thing here. So this is what is called a base station. And so the base station is basically, you could think of it as like an amplifier. It is taking basically cell data, cellular information to this tower here, and then it is then going through and being retransmitted as a radio frequency directly with the collars. So basically it's just kind of amping the signal and ensuring that you get really, really good coverage, especially in very mountainous terrain. So, but with that said, a lot of the companies and some of the new ones, even this company here, we now have ones that use a base station, and we have the same exact looking collar that does not require the base station, that just reports directly to cellular towers. So it's just a rapidly evolving technology. So again, just kind of highlight what we do. We basically just draw a boundary on the landscape. This is kind of what it looks like, just drawing this yellow this yellow perimeter on the landscape on your phone or on your desktop. That information is then transmitted to, in this case, if I have a base station, it's transmitted um, to um, to the base station and to the callers. And then once those callers have those instructions, then the animal is basically just reporting directly to the base station, basically for very accurate GPS monitoring and ensuring that it is being tracked on the landscape. And so this is just a kind of a breakdown of what it looks like on the landscape. So I mentioned they get both an auditory cue and eventually a electrical shock if they don't listen to the auditory cue. So this is what that kind of looks like. So, a cow is coming up on this virtual boundary. The virtual boundary is basically like right through here. And so as they get close to that boundary, they will get an auditory tone. And if they don't turn around or if they don't continue moving forward, then they reach the shock zone where they actually get an electrical stimulus. And so just to kind of show you what that looks like on the landscape, I think I've got my volume turned up here. So I'll just show you, these are some brand new trained cows. And so I'll go ahead and play this little quick video and show you what it looks like. So this, in this case, this Charlet, this whiter cow here, was just coming up on the virtual boundary. The virtual boundary is basically right here, kind of running along this wall. And so she hit it, and you can see the whole entire herd down here all picked up their heads and turned, even though she was the only one that actually emitted any type of auditory cue. So so that was just after a week of training. And so just to quickly show you what training looks like, this is basically one of their pastures that they're always in. This white line represents the perimeter fence, like the permanent barbed wire fence of the pasture. And what we do is basically we just want to draw a single line across the pasture so that they have access to the majority of their pasture, but over the course of the week, the animals are going to, do their thing. They're going to, walk around. They're going to graze. They're going to lay down, and we want them to bump up against this orange line right here. And so we basically track that over time. Usually, again, it takes about 5 days to 7 days for those animals to interact with this orange line, this virtual line. And as they do that, we want to see them responding more positively to those auditory cues and getting less shocks. And so here's in this middle frame. So again, it tracks their every single movement, their GPS points every 15 minutes. And so this was a group of steers that we trained. I think this was 40 steers, and all these yellow points are basically all the check-in marks every 15 minutes. And so there's, layer after layer of yellow points all in here that you can't see, but just thousands and thousands of points. And you can see that over the course of a week, you can see a couple animals wandered across the line and then they eventually came back. But the vast majority of them, it's usually in the 95 percentile, pretty much all pick up the technology extremely quickly. We did another training about a month later with just heifers, and you can see what the heifers did. They stayed where they were supposed to stay. You could see not one of them crossed the line. They all stayed on the upper end of the virtual boundary. So once we feel that they've got enough training, we then just put them out on the landscape. And so this is just another quick video. There's a virtual fence that basically these animals were in this field for about a week. There's a virtual fence that was basically right down the middle of the screen. And we were curious whether or not the animals would have any sort of hesitancy, right? So all week they've been, bumping up against this line, and it's been giving them this auditory cue every time they go up to this virtual boundary, or even an electrical shock if they went too far. And so we turned the fence off and immediately put some hay in this little side-by-side and wanted to see what their reaction was as they came across that line. And so as you can see here, they have no hesitancy at all. They don't even, think twice about just keep on cruising across that line that was just on minutes before. So it's interesting that they aren't really using any cues on the landscape, in terms of visual cues to say, oh, the boundary is by that tree or by that rock or whatever. They are simply learning that auditory cue or the electrical stimulus. So I'll just highlight just maybe a couple quick projects that we're working on. We've been doing this in some forested landscapes. This is, if you saw one of the really big catastrophic wildfires we had back in 2021, the Caldor fire burned, thousands and thousands of acres across the El Dorado National Forest, and ultimately lost miles and miles and miles of fencing on some of those forested allotments where a lot of ranchers take their livestock up into the mountains during the summer. And so rather than building all of those fences back into the forest, we had a rancher that was very interested in virtual fence technology. And so we worked with them to put collars on their animals. And so the basically just looking at this map here, the Caldor fire burn scar was right along here. And so basically built in several different virtual fences across the landscape to try to keep the animals below it. And so as you can see here, pretty much every dot is right below these lines. And so it did a really good job, as you can see, pretty much close to 90% containment across 7,000 acres. And this was really the first year that we got introduced to virtual fencing and working on it. And the technology has just changed considerably just in the last 3 years since we had some of those very first collars. This is just a heat map. I'll just play it quickly. This just, again, shows their GPS location. So we can really start really understanding where animal movement occurs on the landscape from this kind of 30,000 foot elevation of being able to look at heat maps like this of like, oh, animals are really concentrating over here because maybe there's better feed, or maybe there's a more desirable feed, maybe there's some other resource like water. So this really starts to give us some other understandings, not only just keeping them in, but also being able to understand and analyze their movement across the landscape. You may notice this little square here, like what's going on with here. Well, not only can we use virtual fences to keep animals in, we can also use it to keep animals out. And so this happens to be a forest meadow that the Forest Service wanted to keep the animals out of. And so we're like, that's fine, we'll just draw a virtual fence around it. And so we kept the animals out of it. Similarly, the Forest Service had an area where they had a sensitive species. It was a calochortus up there. And so again, we're like, okay, we can draw a fence, a virtual fence around this little lava cap up here to keep the animals from grazing inside that lava cap where that sensitive species is. So all these little blue dots are basically, again, animal movements. You can see a couple little animals, these are all GPS points where they checked in. These were, I think this was 2 animals that decided to go and check things out. So they recorded a couple of points and then they eventually moved out. This is just a map kind of showing that that those animals doing that movement basically at 3 a.m. They're out here cruising around on the landscape, and then they start making their way to this where the lava cap, where the exclusionary zone is. You can see they move in around 3:24 a.m. and then 40 minutes later we find them out here. So they just went in, checked things out. Again, they probably got a mild stimulus for cruising through or going into it. But what is nice about this technology is that it is a one-way gate, meaning animals do not get a negative response when if they do cross a virtual boundary or a virtual fence. they do not get that same either electrical stimulus or the auditory cues on the way back in. So there is no negative interaction going back into where they're supposed to be. So that was this is some data. I think for the sake of time, I'll cruise through this, but basically it just was some data highlighting that lava capped spot. Just, I think one more that I wanted to point out on this specifically because I was kind of interested in about weeds is again, we know about Medusa head. That was kind of why I wanted to talk a little bit about virtual fencing. Well, we know we can use grazing for controlling Medusa head and barbed goat grass, but often it takes high intensity animals in very small areas, so concentrated grazing. And up until this point, it's required some type of infrastructure. So it's required folks to either put in electric fencing, maybe cut their pastures up into smaller pastures using regular barbed wire fencing. So lots and lots of infrastructure. We wanted to see, okay, we've got this big area. This is all Medusa head. You could see it kind of, shimmering in the breeze and in the summer sun. We wanted to see, okay, could we throw a virtual pasture fence around this Medusa head patch, throw some animals in there and force them to eat it before it makes viable seed. And so we put basically 25 animals in this little 3-acre patch of Medusa head last year. And this is basically what it looks like. So it's right along here on State Highway 49. It did have a perimeter fence along the highway side, and this was the neighboring parcel. So this white line is also a perimeter fence. But so we basically created a virtual fence around these two sides. So you can see we got 100% containment. Nobody left the pasture in basically the 2 weeks of the trial. And this is what it looked like when they were done. And so you can see a pretty clear line here of where that line basically traverses across the landscape. This is all Medusa head outside of the grazing trial, and they basically either munched it or trampled it down so it couldn't make any viable seed inside the grazed area. So we were super, super happy with the results. This just looks at some of the data. These were basically the blue is how much Medusa head is out on the landscape. This orange is the desirable vegetation. And then we had bare ground. And so in these two grazing, in the grazing trial, we did 2 different transects. And you can see after the grazing, the blue is the amount of Medusa head. And there's really nothing compared to how many desirables were out there. Outside of the grazed area, that's where you saw a lot of Medusa head. So it just proved that it does really, really work. We also counted the number of seeds or seed heads that were produced. Again, inside the grazing area, that's these 2 bars here, we were getting like, roughly 60 seeds per square meter. Versus in the ungrazed area, there was thousands of seeds. So like a 98% reduction in seed produced using the grazing. So super excited about that. I'm going to skip this trial. This one was just one that we did using basically the same idea, using animals to create a fuel break around a town. This is the city of Sutter Creek. But we basically poured animals into these little 2 virtual fences to create a fuel break. We basically wanted to reduce all of the vegetation down almost to bare ground so that a fire couldn't move across. There's a state highway that basically runs just to the left of this picture. And so if there was a fire that started along a roadside, wanted to prevent that grass fire from being able to move into town. And so basically graze that down to bare dirt. And so that's basically what we did. And the animals did a phenomenal job. And so this is just some of the data that shows where the animal movements, again, pretty much 99% of the animals stayed inside the virtual fences. Yeah, we got the results we were looking for. I think I'll finish up the virtual fencing with this slide here. And just to show you how quickly animals learn this technology. So this first set of bars here on the left is the training period. So I said that it often lasts about 5 days to a week. And the blue bar, or this greenish blue bar, are the audio cues, so the audio warnings, and then the orange is the shock or the pulse warnings. And you can see that on the very first day, they're getting about 70% audio cues, and about 30% of the time they're getting electrical pulses. And that's, runs for about the first few days. They're about that same kind of response. But then as we start getting into day 4 and 5, you start seeing this transition where we're starting to get less and less electrical pulses and more audio cues. And so you can see we rolled them out of this training period and moved them into a pasture. And so completely different pasture. They've never been in that area. They have no idea where the virtual fences are. And you can see already on day 1, they're at 90% compliance with just audio cues alone. And then over the course of the next several days, you can see by day 4, now they're at like 95% audio alone. And that just continues to run through the entire time they're in there. And then we take them out of that area, move them into another complete new area, and you just see that similar trend. Um, uh, a lot of animals are just listening to the audio cues alone, and then again, it just gets better and better over the first couple of days until you're almost at 99% compliance with audio cues alone. So super, super happy with how the animals have responded to that technology. So that was a lot, I know. Hopefully we've got a few minutes for questions. I'd love to hear your all thoughts or any questions, comments about anything that I presented or any other weed related stuff that you'd love to just chat about.
No questions came up. Oh, wait, here's one. Really fun to hear all the research. There's a comment. But if anyone has any questions, please reach out.
Or I guess you could unmute yourself too at this point, whatever is the most convenient for you all.
This is Kathy. Just out of curiosity, what do you know what the price of like one of those
Colors?
collars are?
Yeah, so for the cattle collars, there's several different companies are doing different kind of like I guess you could say business models on how they're doing it. The ones that we have been using here most recently, these E. Shepherd or Gallagher collars that look like, well, I'll go back. Yeah, so these ones here, these ones you purchase outright. So we pay, I think it's about $300 for these collars, and then we own them. The only thing we have to do is pay a minimal subscription fee every year to be able to use their platform. They're basically their application or their app. Other companies are doing more of a leasing model where you basically just lease the collars on an annual basis. And so some of those are like $40 a year per animal. And so if you're interested in the economics of it, my colleague Brian Allen, who's doing a lot of the research with me, he's developed some really great slides and informational sheets on the economics of virtual fence. And so if you'd like that, please feel free to reach out to me and I can get you that information.
Thank
Have,
you. Thank you.
have the collars also been adapted for dogs, so no need to install an invisible fence?
Yeah, great question. So yes, well, let me take that back. They haven't been adapted to dogs, but many of the livestock producers that we are working with are putting them on their dogs. And not these really, really big ones, but we have several small ruminant producers, mostly goats and sheep. And there's a company that we're using, and I didn't put that slide in any of the goat and sheep work that we're doing, but they have these much smaller little collars that are, roughly about the size of that, right? So basically about 3 inches by 2 inches, and they've been putting them on their dogs, and the dogs have really, really good compliance to them.
Are there any Are any of the biological controls you are familiar with available to home gardeners?
Oh, great question. So a lot of them are. I would say when it comes to things like yellow star thistle, I wouldn't even bother buying them because they're so widespread and the insects are such great flyers that pretty much wherever yellow star thistle is in any sort of large population, even maybe outside of your yard or your landscape, they're around. If you go out and look, they're just everywhere I look. There's always biocontrol agents. Um, for some of the others, like puncture vine, for example, and maybe some of the other weeds that you may have, there are companies out there. So there was one called BioQuip. They unfortunately just like went out of business here a couple of years ago. I think they aged out basically. I think the owner decided to just kind of close the door from what I understand. But there are some um, insectaries across the United States that do sell biocontrol agents. So you can just pop online and Google search them if you're interested. BioQuip may still have their website up. I don't know for sure, but it seemed like about a year or two ago, I heard that they were potentially closing up. But there are companies out there.
Are goats used to help control yellow thistle?
Yeah, yeah, goats are amazing. Probably one of the best
Mhm.
at controlling yellow star. Those, especially the timing, they can browse it all the way up through the spiny stage, which most animals like cattle and sheep will just graze it up through early flowering before it gets those really, really spiny heads.
I think that's it. Any last questions out there? That was amazing. Super interesting. Thank you so much.
All
Thank you for
right,
having
thank
me.
you,
It's
Scott.
Okay.
That was definitely interesting.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
Definitely. Yeah.
definitely new information that we wouldn't otherwise get. So thanks a lot.
no
Um,
happy to do it.
so next session, which is Thursday the 22nd, Janet Gard, who's a Yolo Master Gardener, is going to present on worm composting. So if you don't want to kind of deal with a full compost pile, this is an option. And worm castings are even more beneficial than compost probably. So definitely something to catch, a way to make a great soil amendment, kind of in a neater, smaller way. And as a benefit, you get new pets. So, and probably without the high vet bills. So, definitely see if you can catch Janet's presentation in a couple of weeks.
Mike, one last thing. I'm at a wedding that day and Jennifer is hosting.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
All
All
right.
right, but we will be here even if Joan
Yeah.
won't.
Bye,
So,
everybody. Thank you for
bye, everybody.
coming.
All right,
Bye. Bye,
bye bye.
Mike. Bye, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.